Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for showing up. It looks wonderful. It looks like we've had just as many as last week. We all know the importance of why we're here. My name's Deborah Smith. I'm part of Get Concerned Stratford. And today we have three wonderful speakers who are going to talk a little bit about the Chenier Glass Plant and why we're here to begin with, and the importance of why we're here. So our first speaker is Stratfordian and environmentalist Lorena McKenna.
Well, good afternoon. Fellow citizens of Stratford, thank you again for coming out today, and we are greatly appreciate the efforts everyone is taking in following along on this challenging matter. I will try not to be too long. For those who would like a copy of my remarks and many of the documents and media coverage woven into this matter, I invite you to go to our new website called wisecommunities.org. I would also like to extend my thanks to the organizers of this event, Get Concerned Stratford, for their tireless work and contribution. Over the past week, it has become apparent that there are now two subjects of concern, not just one. Firstly, there is the suitability of the proposed glass factory for the city of Stratford. The other, the failure of communication and democratic process, which has left many citizens in the dark where it should have led us to enlightenment. The absence of a process rich in veracity, transparency, and timelessness has shocked many citizens to the core and are now demanding from our officials an explanation. It comes down to trust. Since last week, my quest has been to examine how and why the failure occurred and how things might be done better in the future. But in order to understand that, we need to inquire into the darkness and inconsistencies where they lie. Upon close examination, what appears to be abundantly clear, the mechanics of our democracies are declining and eroding at a shocking rate, including at the local and provincial levels, and where the misuse of and proliferation of ministerial zoning orders are facilitating a decimation of our natural environment, our children's future, and more. Even as we stand here today, some of these undemocratic instruments are being embedded into the provincial government's November budget titled Protect, Support, and Recover from COVID. And by Thursday, it will be a done deal. According to yesterday's Toronto Star, and I quote, David Crombie, chair of province's Greenbelt Council, has joined the chorus of groups urging the government to abandon its changes to environmental laws and cease and desist its extraordinary use of ministerial zoning orders, which circumvent local planning rules and public consultation. The government's actions, he says, are contributing to a growing public concern that the end result will be a widening of the path of political influence on behalf of special interests. Tucking legislative changes into budget bills is designed to avoid proper scrutiny, debate, and public consultation, unquote. At a local level, this approach is compounded by an abundance of in-camera meetings, which circumvent citizens' involvement and scrutiny, and by doing so are compromising our cherished democracy, resulting in irreversible consequences to the environment and more. It is not my intent to run through all the things we are learning in relation to the glass factory proposal. That will come. But there are some key points people should know. In last week's November 23rd article in the Beacon Herald titled, Restrictive Zoning Order Ties Stratford's Hands Matheson, the mayor stated that, quote, Chenier then proceeded to have numerous discussions with the minister with respect to the application of the minister's zoning order only on those lands needed for the float glass manufacturing facility, unquote. Yet when the minister's office was contacted, It furnished the 3 letters the mayor sent between November 2018 and April of this year, clearly showing it was he who was requesting them, not Shin Yi. When these letters became available last week, I contacted Paul Parley, former solicitor for the City of Stratford, who had shared with me his letter to council regarding his concerns with his project. We jointly felt more inquiry was needed and sent council a list of our questions, requesting a moratorium on the project until some explanation was given to the citizens of Stratford. Why had this complex project become so advanced with so little public awareness and consultation? And what did the councils know and when concerning the MZOs? Much has been made about the role of ministerial zoning orders, for which the Mayor of Stratford requested 3 times between November 20th, 2018 and April of this year, the 3rd after being turned down by the minister. Although it has been commonly understood that they could be secured with no public consultation required and no appeal possible, we recently learned that indeed public participation is desired, as per the minister's remarks in a TVO interview of July 10th of this year, only 2 days after the MZO for Stratford was issued, where he states, quote, "For now, we're quite happy with the dozen or so MZOs I've done that have been driven by a council decision in a public council meeting before it comes to my desk. That makes sure the public is aware there is a request. It communicates there is a priority of a council, and then it's up to us to decide whether we want to move forward," unquote. After learning this, I asked myself, when were those public consultations before each of the MZOs that the mayor applied for? Was I out of town touring? And was it discussed and voted on at a public council as per the minister's remarks? And is there a record of that vote? Was that supplied each time to the minister when each of the mayor's 3 requests were made? It is clear there was a lack of familiarity amongst some council members when Councillor Henderson shares in the November 17th council meeting that she'd been a councillor for 14 years and is only now learning about MZOs. One has to ask, are there other councillors who either weren't privy to what was being asked for or simply didn't understand, especially the repercussions and consequences to a transparent and democratic process? Was there any significance to the mayor making the first application for the MZO between the municipal election of 2018 and when the new councillors were settled in? Could this not have waited until everyone was settled in, or even in the new year? Or did the mayor act unilaterally? We have reviewed the bylaws and are unable to find anything whereby the mayor of the City of Stratford is endowed with that level of authority. If this was done unilaterally with the knowledge, consent, and direction of council, we will expect to see this in their response to us this week. And because people's trust in the system has been compromised, they're understandably asking more questions. In these past 10 days, which feels more like 10 months, many people have approached me with their concerns, all in unison over the lack of notice and democratic process. From the woman at the corner shop who sells me my newspaper, to many business owners, including some who pioneered the hospitality industries, which has contributed to making this city such a jewel. It would be disingenuous to frame opposition to this project as an industry or anti-industry position, or that the artists and lefties are at it again. I can hardly remember a time in my 30 years living here where I have met people across all political stripes and social economic backgrounds who have concerns. People understand the importance of industry, revenue, and jobs. But citizens today are also seeking wise, complementary, and forward-looking industries which respect the environment, human rights, and climate change, to name but a few. There is even debate about how meaningful the number of jobs might be, and great concerns that the plant would not be allowed to unionize. But they are most concerned about the lack of transparency. And I will now speak to the subject which arose in some communications over the weekend, and which was raised in Mr. Ricketts' opinion piece circulating yesterday. Although his piece may have some helpful suggestions, it was his implication of racism and xenophobia which must be addressed. I will only say I have yet to meet a person who has expressed anything racist or xenophobic in the nature of their concerns. And this unfortunate effort to reframe and deflect only clouds the real issue concerning China, and which some people may be reluctant to express. It is witnessed by the mere fact that we are all standing here in a country today that allows us to gather and share our thoughts and even our differences of opinion. And I would refer you to Mr. Parlay's excellent letter to Council last week, where he speaks to this dimension, and I will read some of what he wrote because I think it's immensely important, and hopefully you have or will have a copy too. And I quote, "I wish to start out by saying that we ought not to conflate the population and people of China with the government of China or the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and government policies. So what is the connection between the Chinese company Xinyi and the People's Republic of China government and the CCP? The Chinese government passed the National Intelligence Act, which requires all Chinese organizations and companies to provide access, cooperation, and support for Beijing's intelligence gathering activities. Moreover, the CCP has a party committee which is involved in the management of China-based and owned corporations, with a view to ensuring that the activities of the corporation are consistent with and support the best interests of the nation of China. Because the CCP is embedded in and arguably can control Xinyi, any activity of Xinyi which gives rise to a divergence between the political or financial interests of China versus Canada will be resolved by Xinyi in favor of China," unquote. He goes on in his letter to state, quote, "The Chinese government is engaged in a large-scale systemic oppression of millions of people, in particular the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and ethnic Muslim populations. The CCP has punished any opponents to its policies by hostage diplomacy, and has jailed for almost 2 years without any trial or hearing Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. The Chinese government has imposed unjustified punitive tariffs on Canadian pork, canola, and lobster, and has simply banned the sale of other Canadian products in China. The House of Commons recently passed a motion requiring our government to develop a plan to combat China's surveillance and intimidation of Chinese Canadians in Canada and their families in China. And finally, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, warns that this Chinese state-sponsored harassment in Canada, in part, is part of a global campaign of intimidation and harassment which threatens Canada's sovereignty and the safety of Canadians," unquote. This is not just a matter of racism, but of national sovereignty, and I would urge everyone to read his letter in its entirety. So I say to Mr. Rickett, to distort citizens' concerns whose forebears fought and died in 2 world wars, to protect and advance the freedom and liberty which we enjoy here today, but is denied in China and Hong Kong, I would suggest is an egregious failure of awareness. So to the Mayor, I will say this. We have researched and come to know there is nothing technically preventing the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing from rescinding that MZO he gave you last July. Your hands aren't as tied as you thought they were. You just have to ask for it. To our councillors, I would ask you to speak up. We acknowledge that perhaps not everyone was aware or understood MZOs. We just need to understand why. And we accept that 2020 is very different than 2017, and there is no shame in changing your mind. We all know what it's like to come into new information and evolve in our positions. We applaud it and offer our admiration and respect, but we do need to know what happened. Even if it is simply to tell us which of the many in-camera meetings which were held over these past few years were pertaining to this subject. We don't even know that yet. And to all citizens here, I must thank you for your concern and perseverance. We must take care of our democracies and be fully engaged as we are today. We must keep up the pressure and know it is our legal and democratic right to be involved in the process which shapes our communities. We must continue to demand for an accounting of what has happened here. We deserve nothing less. To those of you who have come here today, or last week, or some days in the future, to this public square, near where our elected officials hold our trust each day, all of you are our honor guard, and I thank you for your service. Canadians uphold the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and defending it begins at home.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Brought a tear to my eye. I think I needed to hear all of that.
Our next speaker is Mike Sullivan, who has amazing things to say as well. He is part of our group here.
Thanks.
My name is Mike Sullivan. I forgot to tell you guys this last week, but I used to be a member of Parliament in Toronto, and I like Stratford better. And I recently got a master's in environmental studies at York University, and this is not an environmental good thing, what's about to happen to Stratford. Since last week when we were last here, and thank you all for coming, it's amazing to see so many people standing out in the rain, we learned that it was the mayor himself who asked for the MZO. There were no public minutes. I've been through all of the Stratford City Council minutes, and there are none dealing with an MZO. I have asked since a week ago for the Stratford City Council to tell me where those minutes were, and so far I haven't even had a response. In Perth County and in the township of Perth, there are no minutes asking for an MZO either. Those two municipalities have councils, have a mayor and a warden, and so far nobody can tell me when they discussed an MZO. They just wanted one. It's a very blunt and undemocratic instrument, and as you know, the involvement of the mayor was kept secret until this week. Why are we having secrets in that building behind us? One of the Stratford's principles is transparency and democracy. This is transparent, but that place isn't. The fact that the MZO mirrors Xinyi's actual demands means that the company has somehow managed to influence our elected politicians. Our elected politicians, Mr. Pettipies, are you listening? Our elected politicians in Queen's Park. The fact that they went against what the mayor wanted and gave Xinyi what it wanted means that there's something fishy going on between Xinyi and Queen's Park. No company should be able to dictate the words that a minister uses for any law he or she issues, yet that's what happened here. The use of a dormitory looks suspiciously like a work camp. Now, when it was Guelph, they called it a dormitory. Here and in the MZO, they're calling it an emergency preparedness center. Well, I spent better part of the week phoning as many glass plants as I could. In the US, I spoke to almost all of the manufacturers, and in Europe, I spoke to the place where this process originated in St. Helens in the UK, Pilkington Glass, the guy that invented it. Nobody uses an emergency preparedness center, nobody uses a dormitory, and no workers live on the premises, anywhere. This is a Chinese thing, and you have to wonder what's the labor standards that they're going to bring from China to here. It's certainly not going to be Ontario labor standards, and think about it. We've got the Bruce nuclear plant just up the road here. Is there an emergency preparedness center with 50 workers living there? No. Whole lot worse things can happen there than can happen in a glass plant. I think Xi may have pulled the wool over the minister's eyes, but he certainly can't pull the wool over your eyes. How will we know whether Ontario laws are being followed? In Ontario, you can't be forced to work for more than 48 hours a week. We know that Chinese workers expect to work at least 6 days and more than 8 hours a day. Will those laws be followed in that work camp? I doubt it. There is also a maximum time that you can work in a very hot environment. Many of these jobs will be working in a very, very hot environment. Will those laws be upheld as well when we don't know what's going on? We also suspect, as with the coal mine in BC, that the Canadian workers will be only able to apply if they speak Mandarin. Someone told my son today that they saw a job posting for Xinyi in Guelph when they were talking about there, and Mandarin was a requirement on that job posting. I don't have it, so I can't prove it, but that's what the Chinese company in BC did when they wanted to open a coal mine. The city will be on the hook for $6 million in development charges, and the property taxes to pay that back won't start coming in for many years. So aren't there better ways we can be spending $6 million right now? Aren't there a bunch of very hurting businesses, restaurants and theaters and actors and actresses who could use that $6 million to keep alive? I mean, that's not the only thing wrong with this, but it's certainly a big thing. The environment, they're going to use 25% of the water we now use. That's for one plant. The mayor's letter suggested that eventually there'll be 1,600 workers at this site and at least 2 plants. Well, that's 50% of the water that Stratford uses and maybe more. Will we have to beg for water? Ultimately, is this thing going to use all the water? I don't know. Will we survive a drought with climate change? I don't know. And nobody from that council has submitted any of these documents for peer review. There's all kinds of reports, but they came from Xinyi. Do we know if they're accurate? Do we know if they're true? The greenhouse gas emissions from this factory will be more than the entire city of Stratford now emits. Just one factory. By 17%, it'll be greater. 117%, it'll be 117% emissions increase with the lighting up of one factory, let alone 2. So much for a climate emergency, which the city of Stratford apparently declared. The 330-foot smokestack will be the tallest thing on the horizon for miles around. Those of you who don't know how tall 330 feet is, the water towers are about 140 feet. So these things are more than twice as tall as all the water towers. So imagine what that's like. And all that does is spread the pollution further. It doesn't actually reduce it. Will the strawberry farm next door to the plant be able to sell its slightly polluted strawberries? Will any of us have the same kind of clean air that Stratford provides now once this plant is up and running? I don't know, and the folks behind me haven't asked for they don't even have the air quality report in all those documents. I asked for it 2 weeks ago. It's still not available. There is no air quality report, and the city of Stratford is acting as though this is just fine. There's going to be some jobs. Please go away. Well, we're not going away. We're going in to see the mayor this afternoon and present these issues to them, and I'm going to leave you now and let somebody else tell you what our demands will be of the mayor. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mike. So now our final presenter is Melissa Verspeten, and she will tell you what she is going to ask the mayor today at 3 o'clock.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out today and for adhering to the health unit guidelines. This afternoon, Mike Sullivan and I are going to meet with the mayor. We'll be speaking about steps that must be taken in order to restore public confidence in council and in democracy in our city. Get Concerned Stratford demands that Stratford City Council first stop all decisions on any agreements with the proponents, including cost sharing and site plan agreements. Second, we're asking that the city submit all technical reports from Shinyi Consultants to independent peer review. And third, to make the information obtained during independent peer review available to the public for review and comment. Fourth, require that Shinyi provide a detailed employment plan specifying type and number of jobs to be assigned to Canadian workers and to temporary foreign workers, and include a schedule outlining the ratio of Canadian workers to temporary workers for 5 years from the beginning of operation. Fifth, implement conditions that prohibit any workers from living on site in dormitory-style residences. After contacting several float glass manufacturers throughout North America and Europe, it's been discovered that none of them have workers living on site. Why on earth would our city support something that actively encourages this corporation not to support the local economy? And lastly, we demand the city request that the Ministry of Municipal Housing and Affairs revoke the MZO as issued. The MZO was issued at the repeated request of Mayor Matheson, beginning as far back as November of 2018. Make no mistake, City Council does in fact have the power to undo this. Mayor Matheson's hands have not been tied, as he would have you believe. That's a scapegoat so he can do as he wishes. This has been done with purpose to avoid allowing you and me and the rest of the taxpayers of this city an opportunity to voice our concerns. That's not right, and that's not just, and that's not going to be tolerated.
On behalf of Get Concerned Stratford and Lorena's group and everybody supporting each other, we want to thank you for coming out on this rainy day. We have so much work to do. This is not over. December the 8th, we have a public meeting, and we have leaflets here and the petition. If you have not signed the petition, we have paper copies for you here. Our public meeting on December 8th is going to be Zoom, and we will be asking questions as well. We would love if you could sign up for that. And I really don't think this fight is over. So please watch our website and our Facebook page. We're going to keep going. Like Lorena says, we have to. This is what democracy is all about. This is why I know my father, my grandfather fought, and this is why we do what we do. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you.